Now that we are a few days into 2020, it is the perfect time to release my breakdown of my favorite games of 2019. Well, no, I was hoping to have this out a bit sooner, but better late than never, right? 2019 was an interesting year for games. I sincerely loved a bunch of games this year, but can also say I was let down by some others, or even that some that I was looking forward to, while still good, didn't blow me away. Let's get right into it, but before we talk about 2019, I want to quickly go over my top games from 2018 for reference. My top 5 games of last year were Octopath Traveler, Spider-Man PS4, Celeste, Into the Breach, and Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. I bring these up because when I look back at the calendar year of 2019 games, of course many games didn't come out in that year, and Smash Ultimate was without a doubt my most played game. This is for a few reasons. I mean, first of all, it came out at the very tail end of 2018, so by the time I made my way through all of the story and side modes, and still just discovering the game in the first place, the initial buzz easily lasted me into 2019. I also attended some big tournaments such as Genesis 6 and Battle of BC 3, as well as some locals. And the DLC. A total of 5 characters came out this year: Piranha Plant, Joker, Hero, Banjo, and Terry Bogard, along with 4 stages, the stage creator, and home run contests. Needless to say, there was a lot of reason for me to come back to this one, and while Melee will likely always be my favorite Smash game, Smash Ultimate in a short time has risen the ranks of my games of all time list, and if you ask me today, I would probably slot it somewhere in my top 10. With the prospect of a new character coming by February and the promise of even more characters on the way, Smash Ultimate will likely remain high up in my playtime of 2020 as well. And with that out of the way, let's get into my top games of 2019. I have a ranked top 10 as well as 5 honorable mentions for a grand total of a top 15. As far as spoilers go, I won't be spoiling any big story moments, and I've tried to show pretty tame footage, though I'd say you are pretty safe in the spoiler territory. Let's start with some honorable mentions. Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled. I'm a seasoned vet when it comes to Mario Kart. I've played each of them, and it is without a doubt my favorite racing game series around. I consider myself pretty decent at the games generally, but playing CTR for the first time this year really introduced me to a new Grand Prix of kart racing action. I hadn't played the original games until earlier in the year, and it was with the remaster that I dove in quite a bit more. CTR is a super difficult game. The drifting is highly technical and feels much more necessary than in Mario Kart for all sorts of tight corners. The items, while they can be helpful, don't have nearly the power of the Blue Shell, Bullet Bill, or long list of other solid power-ups of Mario Kart. The shortcuts, both are well hidden and often require precise use of boost or a specific item to access them. And, I mean, I love it. I feel like I've been knocked back to square one for kart racers. The skill ceiling is high, and therefore I feel like I've improved quite a bit, but still have so much to learn. I love the bright and colorful art style, the many characters to pick from, and the diverse combinations of maps. I didn't grow up owning a PlayStation system, but I did grow up playing Crash, so this game feels like a hit of nostalgia I never quite had, and a higher skill-capped racing game all the same, and is worthy of mention when looking at 2019's year of games. I'd been looking forward to Outward for a few years. It seemed like it took bits and pieces from some of my notable games like Morrowind and the Soulsborne series, but was carving its own path since it came from an indie team. I can't say it ended up living up to the hype that I had for it, and I think a lot of that comes down to this genre of an open world RPG, and that's just such a grand scope for such a small team. I felt some basic features were lacking and the world was largely empty or just repetitive gameplay. However, considering the amount of AAA devs that are tackling this genre in different ways, Outward was still able to do something I really appreciated in focusing on the elements of traveling and the journey, albeit I would say at the cost of intriguing destinations. The in-depth systems of considering your carry capacity and where to put your belongings, and dropping your bag when it comes to combat for more maneuverability, the detail put into thinking about having enough food for your travels and being prepared for the cold of snow or the heat of a sandy desert, and maintaining homeostasis is appreciated. I did a full cast on these systems if you want a further breakdown of how these all work, but for the sake of this cast, I'll just keep it at that. It was an interesting game and makes it in my honorable mentions, and definitely puts this company, 9 Dot Studios, on my radar in the future for whatever games they make next. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Oh boy. This one is a real doozy. I can't remember the last time I've gone from loving a game as much as I was in the first few hours to disliking it as strongly as I was near the end. Fallen Order takes all those good things that make the Souls game what they are, that being dynamic combat, the bonfire system, limited and more meaningful healing, and discovery that has those levels unfolding in creative ways. Unfortunately, it falls short in doing most of those things justice in the long run. It takes the ideas without truly knowing the reason that makes them great in the first place. Jedi Fallen Order has a few planets that you can explore. The first one has a beautiful design and really hooked me right away. It provides multiple pathways and interconnecting elements that make it a joy to discover and traverse. It's a short zone, but it is a great introduction of what to expect from this game. The second planet, Zepho, took these ideas and iterated on them in the best way possible. Unique locations and areas, diverse enemy types, secrets and shortcuts, solid puzzles, and just top-notch level design had me entirely invested. This first few hours of gameplay here had me invested in a way that rivals my favorite games of the year. I was absolutely in love with it. Unfortunately, my disappointment rose after finishing this planet. Without spoiling how many planets you have left to visit, everything after this point felt unfinished, glitchy, and overall uninspired. There are some cool looking environments, but the level design recedes to complete linearity, the length never reaches Zepho, and I just felt my sadness climbing. You get all sorts of fun force powers, and I mean, using a lightsaber is deeply satisfying, but I just wanted so much more from this game, or at least for it to stay at the same quality that the first few hours established. I think it's enough that if this team makes a sequel, I will be there for it, but because of its drop-off in quality, I can't quite lodge it in my top 10.
There you go. What's that, BD?
Not too much to say about Tetris 99. It is a new and innovative way to play one of the most classic games of all time. I'm generally more of a Dr. Mario guy when it comes to puzzlers, where you have to organize pieces falling from the roof. However, it's with Tetris 99 that I took more of an interest. It is a very creative format that adds lots of tension and intensity as the numbers dwindle. It also introduces new strategies with its targeting system, which is simple to use but can be manipulated in cool ways. The soundtrack is bumpin', and hey, it's a free game with Nintendo Online, so this was a pleasant surprise added to that service. And lastly, Control. Control is a game that would probably jump higher in my list, but I'm not finished the game yet, and there's something holding me back from spending that extra time to get there. And I'm not sure what it is. It's an awesome game. There's a level of care to the story and world that I really appreciate. Each room feels like it's filled with personality and a real world reason why it's there in the first place. The story is mysterious and slowly trickles out information to the player, while offering lots of additional reading if you want it. And this is all tied together with an interesting narrative that the ongoing events of the world are all conceptualized through the first-person perspective of your character commenting on the world around her. Gameplay-wise, the gunplay is simple but is brought to life with the telekinetic powers that are deeply satisfying to use. The game is creepy, and its sound design helps reinforce this with little whispers and your character's voice just piercing through the audio track. Other than the frame rate issues, I don't really have much criticism to throw at this game. It's great. However, there is that something that hasn't pulled me in, and for that reason, for now, it sits in my honorable mentions instead of on the numbered list. With those out of the way, we can get into the top 10 list from the bottom with Baba Is You. Baba Is You is a puzzle game tried and true. It barely has music, it doesn't have a story, and it's hard to classify it as even having art. It's all about solving puzzles and pushing its mechanics to the limits. Here's how it works. Games typically obey some universal rules. These rules make sense, and we don't second guess them. Things like you cannot walk through walls, lava is hot, water is wet, and you control a character. Baba Is You shakes up this formula. The rules of each level are laid out in words, and you can piece them together or break them apart by making and breaking these simple sentences. For example, wall is stop means you will be stopped when you walk into a wall. Key is open means you can use a key to open a door. Assuming the door is open is also a rule. And as the title hints, Baba Is You means you play as Baba, a little sheep-like creature. The goal of each level is to walk over whatever is determined to be win, most commonly a flag. It is such a brilliant and simple concept that can spiral out of control fast when there are many rules at play and the best of levels require some seriously out-of-the-box thinking to solve. I'm going to spoil a couple of levels to show how this game works and maybe convince a couple of you listening who don't know about this game to check it out for yourself. Let's start with a couple early levels. In level 3, there are a couple rules tucked away that we won't be able to change. Baba is you and wall is stop. We also have some other rules in play. Water is sink, meaning that if you walk into the water, you will die. Rock is push, which is self-explained, and the flag is indeed win. The first part is pretty simple. You don't have many options. You have to push one of the rocks into the water, and now you have a path to get through. But the problem arises, you only have one more rock, and the flag is at least behind 2 water tiles. So what do? Instead, you make rock as win and use your second rock as the goalpost. Pretty simple, but still a neat solution. How about level 7? You are still Baba, and it seems like the solution is to make flag win, and boom, it should be simple. But the problem is, grass is stop, and you just can't quite maneuver flag and win over to is, or vice versa. Well, I think this level is a great example of how our expectations limit us. You may be stuck on this one for a bit until you make an accidental slip. Wall is not stop, so while it looked like you were confined, that was never true. The level is also a nice example of how you can make a cross around the same is to have 2 sentences activated at the same time. Let's do one more, this one a little bit more complex and later in the game. From the Forest Fall section of the game, level 3, Rocky Road. We have some basic rules in play. Baba is you, flag is win, and wall is stop. From there, it gets a bit more complicated. We are stuck in a smaller rectangular section of the level, which has a lake of rocks in the middle. Rock is death, so we can't simply walk right through. We have some other rules in play. Love is push, and love is telly. We have seen push already, and telly, short for teleport, works as you may expect, teleporting things between whatever is telly. So we can use the hearts, love, to teleport across the rocks, but that didn't help too much since the flag is blocked by some water, which is inconveniently death as well. I was stuck on this level for quite some time. Oftentimes, you'll do well to try and solve a level backwards for it to come together. We can do that here too. The last rule I haven't mentioned is that water is also melt and love is also hot, meaning the water will disappear when it is in contact with whatever is hot. With this information, I knew we would have to push love into the water, but you can't teleport across if push is active. I thought, okay, maybe I just have to get everything over on the other side of the rocks, because then I can piece everything together there. So I tried, using love to displace the rocks to make a trail there, but you can only get so far. I tried making a long trail of words, almost like a rope, but while you can get a word across, it doesn't do much in the long run. I tried some technique to make push active on the same turn I used teleport, but the order of operations said no to that one as well. Skip forward a minute if you don't want this spoiled but want to continue with the video. The satisfaction when I finally figured this one out was pretty big. You have to line it up so that push is on love while teleport is active, meaning that every other turn push will be active. That way you can teleport through and push can still be active, albeit not every movement. Then you slowly move back and forth, pushing love into the water and making yourself a path to win. This is one example of which this game has many puzzles. Baba Is You is difficult, and I certainly haven't finished it at this point, but considering I generally don't like puzzle games with only one precise solution, it is a testament to how much the creativity and unique qualities of this game shone above the others I've played. I'm not going to say too much about Link's Awakening, as I wrote a pretty extensive script for the video I made on that game, just a few months ago. I'm a fan of a lot of Zelda games, but none of them would crack in my top 10 games of all time list, or even probably into my top 25. Having not played the original Link's Awakening, I still had a lot of fun with this game. It's incredibly cute, I really enjoyed exploring the world, it is tightly packed with enemies and shortcuts appearing around every corner, leading to little moments of downtime. It's got some great dungeons and some okay dungeons, and was overall a lot of fun to play through. Although I think it being full priced is a bit overboard, I still liked playing through it. My only major complaint is with the added chamber dungeon feature, which acts as a Zelda dungeon maker light. It ended up being very limited and just kind of tedious to get through. Either way, this is another fun and peaceful Zelda experience to add to my list, and sits at number 9 for 2019. After many years of playing Fire Emblem games, Wargroove enters the genre with many similarities, yet many important distinctions. Moving the focus away from set characters and classes to a more broad style of building and army composition, this change affects much of how these games work. Wargroove is a very complete experience too, and has incredible value for its price. There is a single-player campaign that takes about the amount of time a regular game campaign does, and while it is extensive and offers an inclining level of difficulty, it feels at times like it's just an introduction for what the game offers. You can do up to 4-player online or split-screen co-op, versus or on a team versus the AI. You can try the puzzles, which are cleverly pieced together, but perhaps the most impressive part about Wargroove is the custom map editor. You can design the landscape and structures of a map, but you can also add story elements such as events and cutscenes. On top of that, you can weave multiple levels into a cohesive campaign. This level of freedom and depth given to a game is wonderful, as it can lead to, with the right community, an endless amount of content. I have seen people make simple RPGs, recreations of Fire Emblem campaigns, recreations of Planet Earth, the list goes on. Since its release back in February, lots of quality of life changes and additional free content pieces have been added to the game to broaden the possibilities even more. This game is incredibly creative and easily placed in my top 10 for 2019. Overland brings to mind many different games to me. At its core, it throws me right back to 2018 with Into the Breach. It has that turn-based risk-reward diorama strategy that I found so enamoring 1 year ago. Likewise, it is run-based and has those classic roguelike elements from some of my favorites, and in that vein, it reminds me of Spelunky. Once again for that roguelike element, but also by having similar ideas, such as unlockable shortcuts and dark levels that are ever terrifying no matter how good you get at the game. I can draw a thematic similarity with a board game I love, Dead of Winter, in that it has a post-apocalyptic setting, with all that comes along with that, such as scavenging and making use of the simplest of items, recruiting survivors, even dogs, and by managing carefully all of the enemies on screen who may not be immediate threats but can quickly get out of hand. And finally, in the slightest of ways, elements of this game act like those sliding block puzzles, in that not only are you playing as a group of survivors, but you have to carefully maneuver at times in a clunky vehicle through the obstacles that lay in between you and the level's exit. So that's kind of a mouthful. What exactly is Overland? Overland, as described by a developer on the game, Adam Saltzman of Finji Games, while on the Spelunky Show-like podcast, described it as this. Overland is a turn-based survival game where you take a group of survivors on a post-apocalyptic road trip. I would say this is a pretty solid description, with the caveat that this is a roguelike and it can be very brutal. One mistake can cost you an entire run, and since there is no strict time constraint, one run of Overland can take multiple hours opposed to other games in the genre. My biggest intrigue of Overland is subsequently my biggest con against it. It is very similar to Into the Breach. It has that enticing small-scale strategy that lets you viably calculate all of the possibilities and think a couple turns ahead, which can be incredibly satisfying when things go as planned. It has a decent amount of variety in level types, although I wish there was a bit more. The problem that arises in being similar to Into the Breach is that, well, I just like that game a hell of a lot more. The fact that it beat it to market is unfortunate, as that has climbed to be a pretty high-ranking game for me of all time, and Overland just isn't quite on that level. It does, however, innovate in some interesting ways. Roguelikes and stories don't typically mesh well together. Most don't even try to have a meaningful narrative, while others feel like the story aspect were tacked on after the rest of the game was done to simply give context to what the player is doing. This isn't a problem inherently. They tend to focus heavily on the gameplay and the systems, and more aim to make some fun and memorable, visually striking characters to form that emotional connection. Overland goes down a different road. There's a lot of charm to the characters and tone. The characters are simple, but there are little details given to them that make them relatable, or at the very least, feel human. The characters will chit-chat at the end of the level, and you start to form an attachment with them throughout the course of a run. More than any other roguelike, when your run finally comes to an end, you can look back on the adventure your road trippers took as they made their way out west, and think back on the good times and the bad times. These narrative elements pair perfectly with the soft music, the sweeping acoustic guitar and tired but soulful vocals over the charming characters blends into a heartwarming experience that, instead of smashing that reset button, makes you really want to see each run through. Naturally, with the random elements that go into this, some runs will create a better narrative than others, but since it evokes the story into your own head, you fill in the details yourself. And I mean, who doesn't want to have a dog companion on their team? Since release, the devs have been very active to improve parts of the UI and quality of life changes that make it easier to do what you are trying to do. Overall, I would recommend Overland to those who like stories of survival or to fans of strategy roguelikes such as Into the Breach or Bad North, and is easily slotted at number 7 on my list of 2019 games. I'm pretty neutral on Souls games in general. Dark Souls 1 never quite did it for me. It has amazing sequences, but is bogged down by so much crap. And Dark Souls 2 and Bloodborne I've played for just a few hours, but they didn't quite grip me in the same way that Dark Souls 3 has, which ended up being one of my favorite games. Definitely my favorite within the Soulsborne series. It is with Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, where I found myself deeply invested in a Souls game again. The story is much more coherent this time around, the combat feels a lot more movement-based, which I really like, and the character progression is a lot more straightforward than the previous games. The game is beautiful, and it is with that the best part of this game shines through to me. I love the world design. It feels as interconnected and well thought out as Dark Souls 1. I find myself getting distracted often as I go from section to section, getting more and more lost with each passing minute. The grappling hook and traversal mechanics are much more functional and facilitate creativity in how you get around and hunt for secret areas as well. The boss fights I have done so far are both intense and satisfying. Stealth also changes up the style of game significantly. There is a bigger focus on scouting out the arenas and understanding where everyone is, how they patrol, and what zones they cover. You will start by using stealth takedowns to remove some variables, and then slowly pick off the rest of the enemies, hoping you don't get found out and end up having to scramble to win the fight or cut your losses and reset at the most recent Sculptor's Idol. There's a good amount of enemy variety. Of course, the duels are the bread and butter, but the strange enemies help to shake up the formula. Parrying was never quite something I mastered in the Souls games, and by no means have I done it here either, but it feels much better this time around using your sword for counterattacks. Sekiro is a fantastic game, and even though I haven't finished it yet, it is still easily in my top 10 of the year, and I can't wait to push through the rest of it. As of right now, it sits firmly at number 6 on my list. Fire Emblem Three Houses is in a strange spot for me. I have played a total of 8 Fire Emblem games now, starting with Sacred Stones and having played all mainline games since then. It has been an up and down experience. Still, my favorite is Sacred Stones, and while Awakening personifies its title by revitalizing the series a bit, I felt with each iteration the games were moving further away from what I found so captivating about them in the first place. And I felt that even more when I played Into the Breach last year, a smaller, more confined game that had much more dynamic and enticing strategy gameplay than any Fire Emblem I had played in years. I thought it was time I sit out on the newest game, even though since Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn I had been waiting patiently for a home console sequel for over a decade. However, the internet wouldn't stop talking about this game. Critics and fans alike were praising the game, and after seeing some first-hand gameplay and talking with others who had played the game, I caved and eventually picked it up myself. Where to start? The aspect that stands out the most to me about Three Houses is that it lands as a culmination of what the previous games have been working towards. Awakening introduced marriage and paralogs, which were missions where the child of whichever characters got married become recruitable. This was a very fluid system that allowed for many combinations of couples and incentives for players to pair up who they want, and even added replayability in trying different combinations. While Fates, which precedes Awakening, released similarly to Pokemon, there was 2 versions released, framed as Birthright being the forces of good, while Conquest was the opposition. Later released was what I believe is the neutral path, titled Revelation. Other than the story being split into 3 versions, there was a new feature where you tend to a base. And to be honest, this felt like a fairly half-baked idea and is somewhat forgettable. The next game was a remake, so while it didn't push these ideas forward, it did introduce a 3D exploration dungeon crawl mechanic. This was alright to break up the typical cycle of Fire Emblem game, but once again is insubstantial. It's with 3 houses that I feel like all of these features come together and gel well. And most importantly, instead of feeling like experiments with new concepts, it is presented as core features that make the game work in the first place. This game is split into a 50-50 slice. Half of the game is that classic grid turn-based strategy. This element of the game doesn't have too many innovations to the formula, although there are a few. Mini-boss style 2v2 units, battalions, gauntlet weapon types, and adjutants instead of pair-ups. But it's with the second slice of the game which feeds directly back into that combat where things click. Player-made avatars have been standard now for 2 games in the series, and in 3 houses that is switched up by having the player act as professor as well. The game now progresses via a calendar. There are days where you teach your students, or take place in training sessions of your own, but the most substantial days are when you have the day off. You get to roam around the school, where you talk with students, build relationships, take part in mini-games and competitions, find hidden items, visit the shops, and more. This feels like a Harry Potter game, and so much is put into this part of the game, and the first chunk of story chapters are fairly simple and just let you get used to the new mechanics and learn a lot about the characters in the game. It is a much more grounded story than traditional Fire Emblem games, which typically have 2 countries in the midst of war, and it's this slower paced slice of life style that really helped me get a lot more attached to the characters, where Fire Emblem Fates failed by diluting its content into 3 games. 3 houses only lets you pick 1 house per playthrough, but fleshes out each one of these thoroughly and has them intermingling, so that when you have to do battle against these other houses, you have some emotional attachment to both your units and the enemies. The story does get into that more generic Fire Emblem formula in the second half, but it's that strong and surprising initial tens of hours that had me invested in a way in both the story and the characters that I haven't really been in a while for Fire Emblem. With DLC on the way and plenty incentive for multiple playthroughs, this is a Fire Emblem game that will last, and is very clearly in my top 3 of Fire Emblem games of all time, and easily in my top 5 of this year. As I was preparing for our GV Top Games of the Decade list, I was looking back on all of the games I played from 2010 to 2019, and in doing that I noticed one of the first games I played this decade must have been Fallout New Vegas. And in that realization, I think it is somewhat poetic to start and end the decade with a first-person, open-world, Obsidian RPG. From Fallout New Vegas to the Outer Worlds, I think the thing to say about Obsidian's games is I just love what they choose to focus on. The Outer Worlds, slotted at number 4 on my list, is a wonderful little experience. To start and get the negatives out of the way, there is some things like some glitches and UI problems, such as small text, but I think the biggest con I have is also kind of a compliment. I just want more. From an open world Bethesda-esque RPG, it's on the short side. Both the main story and the side quests only fill up so much time before the game is over. Although there is lots of reason to replay the game, as your character will inevitably not be a jack of all trades, these are the kinds of characters I like to play as. The game is beautiful. There is a lot of attention to detail in the art and the design of each location. I found myself getting lost walking around Byzantium, being distracted by the architecture and paintings hanging from the walls. The combat, while not groundbreaking, is solid, and there is some particularly strange and peculiar weapons to find and use. But the aspect which stands highest in my mind is the writing. The characters all have unique personalities and fun dialogue, both well written and voice acted. This shows most obviously with your companions, as you spend more time with them than any other NPCs, and it is truly special. Each companion has an accompanying side quest which will help paint their backstory, character traits, and even give a clue of where they would land on the alignment chart. Not only that, but as you're traveling around, you can have 2 companions join you at a time, and they have dynamic dialogue. The characters will give each other advice, or just have simple conversations about the things in the environment or related to their stories. A cool detail I notice is that if the companions get distracted mid-conversation by an impromptu battle, they will pick up that conversation where it left off. Your ship, the Unreliable, has some personality to it as well. Your companions will decorate their room once you let them aboard, and things you scavenge and trophies you earn will naturally fill up the ship. The head of a lizard enemy, a rug, knickknacks. This game is filled with little details, and I truly appreciate it. Interesting dialogue doesn't end with your companions. While your character is thankfully not voice acted, you are given tons of options in conversation to roleplay many types of characters, and that lives with the story as well. I believe there's only 1 or 2 essential NPCs in the whole game, which means you can complete the main story even if you play a savage murderer who takes out all the contacts that will regularly progress the story. The game is a tad on the short side, but the time I spent on Monarch was some of the most fun I had playing games in 2019. Between the unfolding fallout of the few factions, the character moments for companions, the diverse and brutal environment, and the various events, I just wanted more. More planets, more play areas, more weapons, companions, shops, towns. It sounds like that desire will come true as the devs have confirmed more content is coming in 2020, but more than anything, with this game's success and now with Obsidian being under the Microsoft umbrella, I'm sure they'll have the resources to turn what was a short and sweet experience into something that can stand with the big dogs in the AAA sphere. Even with my complaints here or there, this game is still firmly number 4 of the year, and who knows, with the additional content, where it will end up on my list. As of right now, I'd say I prefer Fallout New Vegas, but I give Obsidian props for doing this game from scratch and achieving such heights. At number 3 is Marvel's Ultimate Alliance 3: The Black Order, and it is my most played game of 2019, second only to Smash Ultimate. The Ultimate Alliance games have a long history within the Geekverse, whether it be streaming the original games years ago or doing fan predictions far before this game was announced at the Game Awards in 2018. And it sticks out if you look at my list of my favorite games of all time. This style of gauntlet-esque beat-em-up gameplay rarely does it for me, but I will admit there was a big hype train going into this game. We would talk about all the trailers on the cast as they dropped. I joined the community Discord to theorize and predict which characters and locations were going to make it with the hardcore fans. And because of this game had been my most anticipated game of the year, other than Spelunky 2, which ended up getting pushed to 2020 anyway. So, how did this game stand up to my hype? Well, I would say it lived up to it. We did a 24-hour stream on release, and in that time managed to beat the main story as well as a few riffs as well. This game has without a doubt the best roster in the series and the best gameplay. It is a simple game, and I will admit is more about quantity than quality, but it still kept me hooked for more hours of gameplay, and tie that in with regular updates, more content keeps coming. The X-Men DLC released just a few days ago and added some new gauntlets, the new Danger Room versus mode, 4 new characters, and over 30 costumes. Looking at this game on paper may not paint the prettiest picture. The story is basic and somewhat lame. The level design is uninspired and lacks replayability. There's lots of copy-pasting when it comes to movesets and content, and there is some quality of life and user interface problems as well. On top of all of that, it has possibly the worst camera I've ever seen in a game. You might be asking yourself, Dylan, what is this game doing in your top 5 of the year with all of these complaints? But I think that just goes to show how much fun I have had going through all of the content. I think the aspect it succeeds at the most is its goal-oriented nature. I'm not traditionally a fan of grindy gameplay, but I felt this game hit a perfect balance of having many things to mark off your checklist without feeling like you have to do the exact same thing for hours on end. After you beat the main story, you unlock a higher difficulty, and then you can unlock an even higher one after that. Plus, the Marvel Knights DLC update added another one on top of that. There is a ton of Infinity Rifts to blast through, which require you to play in certain ways to get all of the stars. Another update in the Marvel Knights DLC added another variant to the Rifts in Gauntlet mode. And the Danger Room update adds a competitive 4 vs 4 variant that you can play online or solo, and is accompanied event-style unlocks to give you a goal to reach for there as well. So between completing all of that stuff, filling out your alliance enhancement grid, hitting certain level thresholds with your characters, and even unlocking all the characters and costumes in the first place, there's a lot to do, yet it isn't overwhelming. If you only have 20 minutes to play, you can hop in and make some progress, or if you have a few hours, you can look to finish off a bigger chunk. You will always have a bigger meta goal to reach, which keeps you motivated, but you can still look back at whatever you did in a given day and see the progress that you made. It's this gameplay loop that keeps me hooked. Not to mention, I think they did a great job of personalizing movesets for each of the characters from previous games, and of course, jump in, jump out couch or online co-op. This game really has it all in that sense. The Fantastic Four DLC is coming in 2020, so this game has a few more months worth of content, so who knows, maybe when it's all said and done it will climb higher on my 2019 list than it sits right now, but still, firmly in the top 5 is respectable without a doubt. Death Stranding felt like this high concept, cinematic experience that would never actually live up to the strange and grand nature of its many trailers. Until I was playing the game, I didn't even know what the minute-to-minute gameplay looked like. It seems to have received fairly divisive slew of reviews across the internet, but as for myself, and I can say for the rest of GV, Death Stranding is amazing. Compared to a lot of other people, I would say I generally have less of a focus on story when it comes to my favorite games, or at least why I love my favorite games. With Death Stranding, I found myself captivated by the cast of characters more so than is typical. Whether it would be the prestige and performance of the actors involved like Mads Mikkelsen or Margaret Qualley, or just the incredible out there stories for each of these characters, I was invested in both the stories themselves and the way they were told. The overarching story is as weird as one might expect based on the trailers, and while I felt the ending dragged on a bit too much for my liking, I still found the overall experience fulfilling to see to the end. And it's not a short game by any means. More than the story though, I love the gameplay. What boils down to essentially delivering packages is broken down into multiple systems which all work alongside each other and make what could be seen as cyclical or repetitive gameplay into a loop that I can really get behind. Game inventories are often absurd. The amount of stuff you can carry in an Elder Scrolls game, the amount of items you can hold in your pockets in almost every game that has an inventory system is pretty nonsensical, but we kind of just accept those things because a game that took that too literally would not be too fun. To that, Kojima said, by taking an inventory system and making that the game. He and the team succeeded greatly. Everything you carry is allocated to an appropriately sized crate and thrown on your back, or attached to either leg or either arm. In this way, you have to balance out weight so that you don't fall over, and over time, via upgrades and player skill, get better at controlling Sam Porter bridges. I don't know what's more absurd, the understanding we have as players to accept that our characters in most games can hold as much as they do in infinitively deep pockets, or watching Norman Reedus carry 10 feet worth of boxes on his back. These balancing mechanics sound like it may be pretty easy, but there is many ways the game adds difficulty to keep the system interesting. There is an endless supply of environmental hazards, such as a snowy mountain, or a deep river, or generally uneven ground. There is exhaustion to keep in line, and there are NPC enemies, both in the form of Marauder-style bandits called mules, and an often invisible tar monster demon things called BTs. The powerful rain and snow will wear down your gear, so you can't lollygag too much, and if you fall and drop your stuff too much, it can break. Choosing your path is not an easy decision to make either, as virtually any path is possible with the right tools and know-how, so because of that, there often isn't a right answer. You might think that using a bike or truck could trivialize lots of these challenges, but these have a list of weaknesses to themselves. Many of these elements can change when it comes to the game's online functionality, which has other players leaving equipment such as ladders or bridges for your use, as well as warning signs and even just cheering you on in general. I deeply love the gameplay loop of this game for its many intricacies, but I think another aspect of this game that I found so fascinating is how it interacts with the experience I've had in my own life. I love hiking. Luckily, in BC, we have lots of great spots for hiking, but earlier this year I traveled to Nepal for general adventure, but mostly to do the Annapurna Circuit, which is a multi-day trek that takes you from the Himalayan foothills to the world's highest pass, Dorong La Pass. This journey took me 14 days and wasn't easy. I feel like I can relate to Sam Bridges at times, trudging through the snow with a massively heavy pack. I got sick for a few days too, which made it even harder, and I can really appreciate the struggle your character has in this game. Seeing Nepali porters carrying 3 to 4 or even 5 packs with weight pulled against their heads, day in, day out. I didn't think that any game would capture some of the magic that I had during that experience, nor did I think anyone would try, but I couldn't help but being brought back to my trip while playing through Death Stranding, and because of these many reasons, it is slotted at number 2 on my list, and honestly has a case for number 1. I think everyone has those movies, games, or TV shows that they say they would love to experience for the first time all over again. Because for those very special experiences, that act of uncovering the story for the first time, the plot twists, surprises, can only truly be had once. I can confidently say that Outer Wilds is one of those games that I would love to experience again for the first time, all over again. Outer Wilds, not to be confused with Outward or the Outer Worlds, which appeared earlier on my list, is a hybrid of open-world exploration and puzzle game. Unlike any other specific game on my list, while I'm not going to spoil anything super specific with my recap of this game, this is a game that is best gone into blind. It is about half the price of your typical AAA game and can probably be beaten in somewhere between 10 and 15 hours, depending on how quickly you can solve some things. So it's relatively easy to have the experience of playing this game without having to commit too much time or money. With a spoiler warning established, let's get into it. Outer Wilds has you playing as an alien living on a small planet, which shares some basic features of planet Earth. Shortly into the game, you hop into your ship and start exploring your solar system. You are one of the first of your kind to go up to explore the remnants of the previous civilization that colonized the system, but you have the advantage of being the first of your kind to do it with the translator device, so that you can deconstruct the writings of that civilization. These pieces of dialogue are very well written. They have a charm to them that makes them feel like real conversations, and that there is people behind them that wrote them. You will decode these writings from scientists and children. Some of these have notes that help develop the personalities of those writing, while some help you to piece together the mystery of the solar system and why what's happening is happening. There are a few planets to explore, and each one has its own special features, whether it be a planet with a black hole in the center that is slowly eating the planet alive, or the Ember Twins, which are 2 planets held together by a tower of sand that alternates between the 2 of them. The events of the solar system unfold in a way similar to Majora's Mask, in that there is a finite timer clicking down, and you play from the beginning of the cycle and go until you either die or reach the end of the timer, after which the sun goes supernova and knocks you back to the start of the cycle. Death is something you fear, yet it's liberating at the same time, and allows you to experiment with solutions on how to accomplish the various tasks that you have to accomplish to reach the credits. The game does have an ending, but the events in which you get there will almost certainly be different for every single person who plays the game, and because of that, where many puzzle games can pass me by when I hit a wall, I felt Outer Wilds keeps you invested by offering the game as an open world. If you get stuck in one section, you can go elsewhere and uncover some secrets there, and perhaps eventually hints and clues that could lead you back to the first place you were having trouble. Some of the solutions are pretty dense and heavy, but the vast majority of the game tackles puzzle elements in a deeply satisfying way. I'll spare the specifics, as I want people to play this game for themselves, but the game is incredibly clever with its solutions and design, and would probably be near the top of my list of games that I wish I could experience for the first time again, and lands in that number 1 slot for the year for me, as outside of just this year or even this decade, it is one of the most creative games I've played in my entire life, and whatever Mobius Digital releases next, I will certainly be there. So that about does it. That is my list of my favorite games from 2019. A very solid year of games and a few that I know I'll be playing into the new year. Next year has some bangers too, with the likes of Spelunky 2, UFO 50, Cyberpunk, Animal Crossing, and many more. As for the games mentioned in this video, I wanted to offer some further listening if some of the games I talked about you want more of. I did solo episodes for The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, Outward, and Wargroove, GV reviews for Death Stranding, The Outer Worlds, and many casts on Marvel's Ultimate Alliance 3 are also out there. You can find reviews for other 2019 games on our channel with Luigi's Mansion 3, Mario Maker 2, and Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. We also recently released a cast of our top games of the decade, so check that out as well. There are some 2019 game discussions in there as well. Links for all of those are in the description. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to check out GV in the socials, whether that be Twitter or Facebook, and you can listen on, well, wherever you listen to podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and YouTube. Thank you so much for listening. I'm not sure what my next video or cast on video games will be. I have so many things I'm excited for this year, so just be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for whatever that may be.